have a theory on why.
Welcome,
Hey,
everybody. The
everybody.
water is nice and warm. Jump in the pool. Join us today for the latest edition of Two Bearded Jews Talk Politics.
Hit that like button as you come in so that more people find out about us. I just got a notice about a competing show and subs. We have to blow them out of the water. We have to be the top
Destroy them.
1
We
p.m.
have to destroy them.
Wednesday Substack show.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we have a lot to talk about today. We're very excited. Special guest, Abby Livingston from the Puck News, will be joining us at 1:30 to talk about Congress, the midterms, Texas.
Yeah, we got lucky. We told you last week Abby was going to be on, and then the biggest political story of the week happened in the place she grew up.
There you
So
go.
we
Perfect.
we
Perfect
have
timing.
we have a Midas touch over here.
Apparently we do. So, yeah. So come on in, join us. The more, the merrier. Lots to talk about. I think we do need to start off, which is, I think, what is just maybe the saddest story of the day,
Hey.
which is the evisceration of the Washington Post by Jeff Bezos and his incompetent publisher, Will Lewis. Um, this is just a sad. I mean, a third of the staff were laid off. The sports section completely destroyed. No longer going to have a standalone sports section. And I'll just say, I want to mention this. I did not grow up in Washington, but when I moved to college in Washington, I subscribed to the Post. I read it every day. I love the Post, and to be honest with you, I love the sports section of the Post. Back then, this was in the early '90s. The Post had just the most amazing sports section, most amazing collection of writers, guys like Tom Boswell and Tony Kornheiser and Michael Wilbon, and they've maintained that legacy of just great sports reporting for years. And today, Jeff Bezos, who, just as we should mention, is worth $250 billion, destroyed it because they lost $100 million last year.
And this is personal to me on some level. My history publication started at the Post. We spent 6 years in a partnership, so I worked every day with their editors, and have a lot of respect for people. And this is unconscionable. Okay, he's not only worth $250 billion, but this is a guy who is responsible for them losing hundreds of thousands of subscribers because he chose not to endorse in the 2024 election. He totally misread his audience and what they were, and then decided to make the editorial page a libertarian organ, basically, which again ignored who his customer base was. He wanted to make this his personal plaything, which is fine if you're then going to back it with money. But clearly, he wants to run it like a business then and says, well, we're losing a lot of money. Um, I too mourn the evisceration of the sports page. People like Chelsea Janes, and they've had every legend, Sally Jenkins,
Sally
um,
Jenkins, yeah, she's great.
The late John Feinstein was there for decades, but they went beyond that. Not only did they eviscerate the international coverage and the sports page, but like they just fired their Texas political guy
I
at
know.
a time that Texas is about to be a major story, and Paige Cunningham, who did their national health reporting, like the list goes on and on and on. It's just absolutely terrible. And it really is a shame because there were very few national newspapers, and now there's one taken off the board. It's, we're down to the Times, and the Wall Street Journal. And look, there's great political coverage in lots of places, Puck, Politico, Notice, but those are just political. And there are other parts of the world, and when we're not covering them, a lot of things happen that are bad. The light, the disinfectant in the world is light. It's transparency. It's seeing inside of things, and there are big business and health entities and things that have a huge impact on our lives, and more they're not being covered. We've seen Pittsburgh is losing their biggest newspaper. There's not going to be a major newspaper in Pittsburgh anymore,
Yeah.
which is not a small city. It's not a huge city, but it's not a small city. And this is happening everywhere. We're seeing the evisceration of journalism. And all I can say is, first of all, we need to get our journalistic outlets controlled by nonprofits. And we need to the maximum extent that every individual American can, to support journalism because it's not free. Um,
I got to add to this. Like I used to be a columnist at the Boston Globe, and which was owned by is owned by John Henry, who was a very exceptionally wealthy individual. And I always was of the view that, and there, of course, he was obsessed with trying to, prove you can make money with, and the Globe did actually make money, at least when I was there. I'm not sure where the situation is now, but I always felt, John Henry is worth so much money, and the losses of the Globe are so minimal compared to his net worth that he could basically just, lose money and he would be fine. And
Yeah.
he could run it as a philanthropy. And Jeff Bezos can do the same thing. And I assume that the reason why he's doing this is because apparently $250 billion, a quarter of $1 trillion, is not enough money for him. And he needs to make more money and he needs to curry favor with this, president and this administration. And so that's clearly what drove the decision, the terrible decision, as you point out, to not endorse 2024 election. It probably is what drove the decision to eviscerate what was a really good opinion page, and now it is just a disaster. It's a disaster. And I mean, the opinion page on the Post sucks. I mean, I'd just be very clear about that. And it used to be, I mean, one of the best in the country. And it's just very sad. And I think, as somebody who used to who does well a lot of international coverage, I think their international coverage in some cases, at least when I was focusing on Afghanistan, this was like 15 years ago, their coverage was better than the Times. It was the best of anybody. Josh Paltrow, in particular, stands out as somebody who just did an exceptional job of covering the war. And it's just very sad and very pointless. There is really, what again, the paper lost what, $100 million, which is a lot of money to lose. The guy is worth $250 billion.
$1 billion.
He has more money. He probably has $100 million in the cushions of his sofa, or his 20 or 30 or 40 sofas he has all around the world, and his fucking half a
Right.
billion-dollar yacht. The man has a $500 million yacht.
There's
Five
5
hundred
years of
million
losses.
dollars. That's
Five,
5 years of losses. Give me I'm sorry.
he made the best case I've ever seen for wealth tax today.
You know what?
Um,
Like when I see stuff like this, I'm like, we need to be taxing the
that's
wealthy
right.
way more than we are.
That's
And
right.
and you want my honest opinion? A guy worth $250 billion is a policy failure. And I know conservatives will complain, but no one needs to have that much money. And you know what? If you're gonna have that much money, at least use it for some good, right? Building a
Yeah.
$500 million yacht is not good.
And let's drill a finer point onto it. Again, he decided that he wanted to make the Washington Post reflect his political perspective instead of running it like a business, in which case he would have catered to his customers and he would have
Absolutely.
endorsed in the 2024 election. He
Absolutely.
did this. He did this.
Absolutely.
And then he doesn't want to cover the losses and take the responsibility. He wants to blame a bunch of really good journalists who don't deserve this. And again, I can't stress this enough. Newspapers are public trusts. They are, I see newspapers and sports teams where I think that there's a unique responsibility that you have to the public in an individual city for
Absolutely.
giving them
Absolutely.
this product. This is not a regular business. This is not Amazon where if he wants to cut people, okay, it's a business. We all know that. We get that. That's not what a newspaper is supposed to be. I mean, somewhere Kay Graham is rolling in her grave. This is just disgusting, frankly. Um, that's all I
Larry
can say.
Simon in the comments says, at least the robber barons left us museums. And I want to just make this point that, like, the robber barons, for all of their faults, and they had many, actually had a sense that philanthropy was important and could do good things for not just, their pet causes, but for actually society at large. Right. And the Rockefellers and the Fricks and the Morgans, I'm not going to like sugarcoat terrible things they did do, but they also left an incredible legacy behind them of philanthropy. Warren Buffett is doing that now. Bill Gates, whatever you want to think about Bill Gates and think about Microsoft, that guy has put his money to produce so much good in the world. The money that he has devoted to public health, for example. And, what is Bezos doing? He's building fucking spaceships and yachts and having fakakta weddings in Venice. This is just ostentatious wealth.
Fakakta, good
And
word.
it's one of my favorite words. For those of you who don't know, it's a Yiddish word. It may be my favorite Yiddish word. The whole thing, the more I talk about it, the more angry I'm going to get, because it is, as you said, and I think probably is exactly right, it is such a violation of sort of like civic trust and civic responsibility, right? I mean, this is what I was, so go back to my point about John Henry. John Henry actually, lived in Massachusetts, lived in the Boston area. Like, in my view, he had a responsibility as the owner of the Globe to to you know make this a paper that actually did was that make it a great newspaper, because Boston needed a great newspaper. Every city in America needs a great newspaper.
Yeah,
And the fact of the matter is the Washington Post has been a great newspaper forever. And I fear it will not be anymore.
yeah.
And it's
No,
heartbreaking.
not
Heartbreaking to me.
fear. It won't be. You can't not cover. They fired the person who covers the Kennedy Center in a week that the president seems to have unilaterally decided to shut the Kennedy Center down after he destroyed it. Like you can't not cover whole swaths of the world and be a great newspaper. And I do think that it is worth saying. Matt Iglesias, who Michael and I both have serious issues with, tweeted this morning. I continue to think that an underrated way for a rich guy to gain social esteem would be to buy a star newspaper, except that will not be profitable. Focus on a lot of very traditional, very down the middle state and local reporting, the stuff that doesn't get covered, and then you can run whatever editorials you want. And someone made the John Henry analogy. In response to that, it really is that simple. That
How about the Wall
you,
Street Journal? That's a
yeah,
good, even better example. I don't like their editorial page. It's one of the
no.
best newspapers
They
in
did a
America.
tremendous piece yesterday that's been making the rounds on the power of Stephen Miller. Um,
Ah, yes.
yeah,
Excellent
that
piece.
really, really good piece. They do great reporting. The fact that I don't agree with anything that comes out of their editorial page doesn't bother me. And the thing is, good reporting can come from ideological perspectives. I read the Dispatch. I talked to a reporter for the Dispatch the other day. They are right of center. I don't agree with what their founders think. I don't agree with a lot of their opinion stuff, but they're doing good reporting.
Yes.
And you can have good reporting, support that, and still get your opinions out there. And when you're a guy like Bezos, you have a certain civic responsibility. I believe this, and
Yes.
it's not philanthropy so much as a responsibility to the society. Because let's face it, we are all the reasons that he's wealthy. Our patronage of Amazon over the years has given him his wealth. And we are also the government that doesn't tax these things nearly as much as we might,
As we should.
and as we should. And so there's a civic responsibility there. To make sure that cities have newspapers. And again, I was talking to someone who shall remain unnamed about a book project yesterday, and this person had been a reporter in Philadelphia in the 80s and said, "Oh, it was so delightfully corrupt. There was always a story." And that's the kind of corruption that doesn't come to light if you don't have robust local reporting capacity.
Absolutely. Look, and the thing is, the Post can still do good reporting, even with this evisceration. But like you think about, we have news deserts in this country of places that just cannot get good local reporting. And I look, I'm just going to say it
And
again.
I'll just point to
Go
something
ahead.
they eviscerated earlier, which was their copy desks. And this is something that people never see. Oh, they fired all the copy editors. But I'm an editor, so when I'm reading a news story, it drives me nuts when I see typos or factual errors or things,
Right.
because I know that they haven't invested in copy editing. Copy editors can be a pain in the ass if you're a reporter, a columnist, or an editor, but they save you over and over and over again by catching your mistakes and things like that. And it's just something that the average reader wouldn't notice, but is really, really, really valuable. And we just, I can't emphasize how bad it is for society that since the internet, basically, journalism is failing. The model of journalism is failing, and that we have these news deserts all over the place where there's no one to uncover things about. The only state that seems that has a really great organ that has figured a model out is the Texas Tribune, where they provide great coverage of Texas as a nonprofit. But we've got to come up with more of these nonprofit models.
Look, you
Uh,
do, and ProPublica is another one. But the
yeah,
fact of the matter is that a lot of these rich people just need to accept the idea that if they take over a newspaper, they're going to lose money. And again, I'll tell you it again, Jeff Bezos could lose $100 million a year for the next 25 years. It is a drop in the bucket. It is a drop in the bucket to his net worth, which again, $250 billion. 1% of his net worth would be $2.5 billion. He could pay for Washington Post losses for, 20 something years. right? So
Yeah.
it's a tragedy. But anyway, get back to the fun-filled world of American politics right now. There's not. Well, let's see. We're going to talk about the
Do you want
Texas
us?
state
Yeah,
senate
we'll talk
race.
with Texas with Abby. Do you want to start with the moderation debate, or you want to wait
Well, that's
more
a
time for
longer
that?
con. It's a
Okay.
long. Let's start on it now, and then we can maybe pick up on it after Abby finish up with
Okay.
Abby. But what got me about this issue is there's a big. I'm going to write. Written something that'll be out probably tomorrow or today or tomorrow for Truth and Consequences about the Boston Review, which is a good independent paper up in independent, I guess, magazine. I'm sure it's not a newspaper, but they do a lot of good stuff. They're publishing a piece up in. They had a big symposium on the issue of should Democrats moderate. And you know the lead piece was by a couple guys named Jake Grumbach, who's he's at the University of Wisconsin, and Adam Banika, I think it was, basically arguing that Democrats don't need to moderate. That that's not the way that for them to win back political power. I actually didn't really agree with the premise of the piece, to be honest. I mean, I agree in some respects. I think the moderation debate is overstated dramatically. I don't think Democrats need to moderate because Democrats already moderate. They're already a much more moderate and centrist party than Republicans are, and there's not even a question about that. And I mean, for some Americans, there's a question, but I think if you look at the ideological swings among the two parties, it's pretty clear that Democrats are much less extreme than Republicans are. And there was a bunch of responses to it. People like Elliot Morris, Matt Iglesias, a couple of, who else? Amanda Lippman had a really good piece, actually. But what I think is sort of frustrating about this moderation debate is that, okay, so Democrats lost 2024 election. Right. We know this. They lost by a point and a half. I actually did the math on this the other day. That's sort of a fascinating stat. This was the worst incumbent. This was the worst presidential victor. Sorry. The the smallest presidential victory of someone who also won the Electoral College since 1968. Smallest 1.5 points, smallest popular vote victory. Uh, Now, of course, Trump lost popular vote in 16. Bush lost it in 2000. They both ended up getting elected president. But to actually win the presidency, win the popular vote, and win the Electoral College, smallest in 68. So pretty narrow. And what has happened since then? The Democratic Party has, regained its stature. Have they moderated? Ryan, have they moderated in the last for 15 months? No, not
No.
really. They
The
really
only people
haven't.
who think that
What?
are leftists.
I'm sorry?
I said the
Say
only
that
people who
again?
think that are leftists who are still
Right,
mad at
right,
Chuck Schumer
right,
every day of the week.
right. We always talk about that in a second. But the thing is that, I looked at this thing as Ipsos had this interesting poll. Ipsos is not the best pollster, but it was interesting. They asked this question: which party is better at handling immigration? They asked the question in February of 2025, and Republicans led by 23 points. Today, their lead is 6 points. It's a 17-point shift. 11 of that points, the 17-point shift, is from people saying the Democrats are better on immigration than Republicans. So Democrats improved by 11 points on immigration by literally doing nothing
Nothing.
different in immigration. Nothing different. So the point I'm getting at here is that Democrats have regained their standing, not by moderating, but by drafting off of or benefiting from the policy extremism of
Of
this
Republicans.
administration, right? Because Republicans have not moderated. Republicans have gone too far to the right on deportation, on rule of law issues, on, guide up all the Doge, the cuts in government spending, all of that. So, what's interesting about this is that you can really make the case that Democrats have succeeded or have regained the political momentum. They won in the off year elections in November. They've won in special elections precisely because their opponents are not moderating. So why are we so fixated on the idea that Democrats have to moderate? I, is
I
that
have
hurting Democrats in special elections and off year elections? One more point. Mikey Sherrill ran, I'm not criticizing her. Don't get me wrong. She ran a very conventional, paint by numbers, Democratic campaign. Focus on the issues Democrats always focus on. not dissimilar to the way Phil Murphy ran for governor twice successfully in New Jersey before her. And she won by what, 17 points? 16 points? She didn't moderate. She did what Democrats have always done, but she succeeded because the other party has moved this far to the right. That's what's going on. And it's baffling to me that we keep having this conversation with Democrats even to moderate when they're not the ones who are too politically extreme right now.
I think
Sorry,
there are
I'm done
three
with my
reasons.
rant. Go ahead,
There are three
please.
explanations to answer your question. The first is one that's going to drive you and I both nuts, which is Republicans won two presidential elections while losing the popular vote. Had they lost in 2000 and in 2016, they would have experienced one of the longest droughts in presidential history. And the reason would have been because moved. You go back to the 1970s, they've been going rightward ever since, and dramatically so. And eventually, if you lose enough, you realize you have to change course. It's what happened to the Democrats in the late 80s, early 90s. It's what happened to the Republicans in the early 50s, or they started earlier trying to moderate in the 40s with their nominees, but it took time. But so I think that's the first piece. Republicans got lucky, and as a result of their luck, when we look at the first 30 years of this century, they will have held the White House for 16 of them, despite their extremism. And because of,
Can I just
yes.
caveat what you just said and point out that since 1992, Democrats have won the popular vote in 7 of 9 presidential
Mhm.
elections. You know the last time that happened? 1932 to
Right.
1968.
That's exactly the point I'm making is, but for these two lucky things, I was
Or
explaining the butterfly ballot to my
64.
students.
I'm sorry, 64.
I was explaining
Right.
the butterfly ballot to my students the other day, and but for these lucky I'd say lucky, and the failure to expand the House, which has led the gap between the Electoral College and the popular vote to grow. They were able to sort of mitigate the impact, and they haven't. It's like putting your hand on a stove, but you're not feeling the burn. Basically, is what happened, and so they've been able to get away with getting ever more extreme without paying electorally. And some of that is that we have an impulse in our politics because we have a two-party system that when you're mad at the party in power, it doesn't matter who the other guys are, you're going to vote for them, because that's the way to register disapproval and to vote for change. So I think that's the first reason why we have this debate about Democrats but not Republicans. The second reason I think is that Democrats have done some generally very small, nitpicky, stupid shit that has made them look more extreme. I'll give you an example here. I just saw as we're on here, I got a text alert. One of my friends was complaining about paper straws. Um, and he's in California, and like they have like a made that like a law. Okay, and it's stupid shit like that that I think gives this perception that Democrats are more extreme than they actually are. Um, and I think that we've done some of that stuff with language stuff. We've done some of that stuff and some of it, to be, fair, is Republicans have done a very good job over the last decade of weaponizing those weak points for Democrats, where they've drawn a lot of attention to one dumb teacher doing something that they shouldn't be doing in a classroom and painting it as all liberals and Democrats and getting a lot of attention for it.
But I want to, let me interrupt for 1 second here. I think the issue is that people have completely misinterpreted what happened in the 2024 election. There's this perception pushed by, let's be honest with you, moderate, uh, centrist establishment, what I call pundit bros, that argue the Democrats lost because they went too far to the left. That is not, I mean, I should say that's not what happened because I guess there is some element of that, but it's not really why they lost. Why they lost, or the better explanation for why they lost, I should say, is the same reason why every incumbent party
Yeah.
in the world lost voter share in 2024. I will keep making this point. They'll put it on my gravestone, a headstone. Every incumbent party in 2024 lost voter share. Okay, Democrats are no different. That is all because of the post-COVID inflation that came, from after the pandemic. That is the big reason why Democrats lost, and it is very little to do with their lack of moderation. And I'll keep making the point also that in the places that are the most narrowly divided electorates in the country, the 7 swing states, Arizona, Nevada, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Georgia, and North Carolina, those are 7 states. Democrats hold 10 out of 14 Senate seats at 70%. 5 out of 7 governor's mansions, 5 out of 7 attorney generals positions. That is an indication, in my view, the Democrats are perceived, at least again in these in the purplish states, the most nearly divided states in the country, they are perceived as the more moderate party. I mean, for what that ever. I mean, that's a bit of a simplistic way to put it, but they are not seen as so extreme to the left that they can't win over these voters, these more competitive voters.
I think that's a good point, and I do think that it wasn't just pundit bros pushing this or moderates. I think we saw a fair amount of reporting, and we saw a fair amount of focus groups and things like that, where voters did point to Democratic extremism on some narrow issues, immigration, trans issues, things like that. And I think that it's a case of like what Michael is sort of saying is that was like 20% of the reason why they lost. We're, ignoring the 80%, which was voters were angry about the economy and inflation. And we're focusing on the 20%, maybe because it's things that people feel like they can control more, but maybe because we've got the percentages wrong. We've kind of flipped the narrative of what it should be. But and look, I think moderation, I think avoiding stupid own goals where you're pleasing interest groups and getting a scans from the majority of Americans on an issue is something that both parties ought to do a lot more to avoid. I mean, to be very honest, one thing that Donald Trump has done really well that has helped him is he's at least moderated by not talking about abortion, which was a loser of an issue for Republicans for decades because they were beholden to a base that didn't was in the minority on the issue. And
Yes.
so they kept saying things that were out of touch. And Donald Trump has basically said, we're not going to talk about that. The pro-life groups are furious at him. And he's realized that, he shut up about it. He said it's a state's issue. You notice I said this to my students also the other day. It would have been inconceivable to Michael and I 30 years ago to say you're going to have Roe overturned, a Republican president, a Republican Congress, and there's not even going to be a vote on a national abortion ban. It's all Donald Trump recognizing that this is a loser of an issue. So that's never a
Yeah.
bad thing. But it's true that most of the voters are just focused on their own wallets. And if they feel like the party in power has been bad for them, they're going to vote for the other guys. And that is why we have this distorted
But
conversation.
but hold on. Yes, but that is the only explanation for why Republicans are so unpopular right now. It's not the only
No,
explanation.
no,
It
absolutely
doesn't
not.
explain why, like Mikey Sherrill won by what 16? I think it's 15 or 16 or 17 points, and why Spanberger won by a similar margin in Virginia. She won because there's a backlash to the president. And by the way, I'm like this point again and again. The backlash to Trump is because of his policy extremism.
That
It's because of his tariffs. It's because of the deportations. Look, also it's part of it is just thermostatic public opinion, which tends to swing as a pendulum against the party in power, but not like Trump is so unpopular. It's more than just that. It is his policy extremism.
I agree with you. Although later after our and it was a good segue to our guest coming on. But afterwards, we should get into we often talk about how we think that we overrate the importance as a society of like policy. That most Americans aren't tuned in. They don't know
They're
what's
not.
going on. But what Michael's saying is when it cuts through, when it's extreme, when your rhetoric is extreme, when you do things that are vividly unpopular because we have videos of Homeland Security agents shooting people in the streets, then you're paying for your own policy extremism. That has definitely hurt Donald Trump over the last year or two, on immigration stuff, on tariffs, you name it. So he's paid for it,
Right.
and we're seeing it. We can kind of segue because Abby's going to jump on with this minute. The biggest story of the week is a state senate race in Texas on Saturday night, a special election. And there's irony. This
Yes.
state senator may never cast a vote because the Texas legislature is only in session in odd years, but it was a 31 plus point swing from a district that Trump won by 17 points in a territory. Um, uh, Michael's working with Abby on some technical stuff. But uh, because the Substack platform, we've said this before, their video platform isn't great. Um, but there was this is northern Tarrant County. This is Fort Worth. It's the largest county in America that is voting red, and it is territory where the last time Democrats won a state senate race was 1978.
Wow.
And the state senator changed parties in 1981 before I was born. And that was the last time Democrats won there, and it's something Abby had a great piece in Puck last night. I think it was last night. I've lost all track of days, but going into why Republicans are panicking over this, and we're going to talk to her about it. But it is a clear backlash in Hispanic precincts there. The Democratic candidate whose name I'm now blanking on,
Raymond, I think his last name was.
Rammer. Okay,
Um, do you know how much
Taylor.
the swing
Taylor, I
was?
think.
Do you know what's the Taylor Raymond? Yeah.
Yeah,
Do you know how much the swing was among Hispanic voters? You know how large the swing was?
massive, seismic.
50, 50 points.
I
50
I
points.
know that he did better than Hillary Clinton did in those Hispanic precincts in
And
2016,
Hillary
which was
Clinton
the high
did
watermark.
relatively well among. Yeah, exactly. Well, I think Obama did better, but she did. Well, maybe not. Well, I think he did, but
No,
I'll
I
look that
actually
one up.
think that she did better than Obama did because people were afraid of Trump in 2016,
Yeah, maybe you're
Hispanic
right. You might
voters.
be right.
But like it was really this is a kind of seismic thing. I keep calling it a Ron Lewis moment for those who don't know the reference. In 1994, I think it was Jamie Whitten died, but a Democratic congressman who had been around forever from Kentucky, passed away. Who was a senior Democrat, and there was a special election, and a Christian bookstore owner named Ron Lewis, a conservative Republican, won the seat, and it was the sign that the seismic wave was coming that was going to
Right.
unseat the seemingly permanent Democratic majority. And so, we're looking at these things. We're looking for this kind of evidence, and we don't have a lot of elections that would signal stuff in this way. And so that's why people are kind of latching on to this as such an important signal.
Now, I just want to be clear on something too. This is a 31 point overperformance in 2024. Okay, you're not going to have a 31. If there's a 31 point swing from the 2024 vote in 2026, Democrats will win. I don't know, 300 seats or something. I
Yeah,
mean, I
it
don't
was
know,
William
not
Nachter.
300.
William Nachter was the Democratic congressman who died in 1994. I looked it up. Senior. He
Okay,
he was he was the chair of the Appropriations Committee after Jamie Whitten.
got
But
it.
yeah, 31 points. So if somebody did the map, it would be insane. Democrats would win in like Mississippi. They'd win the Alabama Senate seat. It would be
Yeah,
utterly and completely insane if we had this. And to be clear, the midterms are going to be less democratic than the
Abby.
special
Hey
election. Hi,
guys.
Abby.
Hey,
Hey. Um,
so
that
glad to have you here. Thank you for
we're
coming.
glad we're glad to have you. It's always nice to first of all have one of the foremost experts on Congress out there, and you should always be reading Abby on Puck, but also a fellow Springsteen devotee.
I wore my Stone Pony t-shirt for y'all.
Nice. Excellent.
Cool.
Excellent. And we're giving you a dispensation, even though you don't have a beard. We're still allowing you, obviously, to come on to the show.
um,
And I'm a
We're being
Methodist,
generous.
but I love you guys. So I'm mad.
That's right.
yeah.
That's right. So, Abby, so glad to have you here. Let's talk a little bit about Texas and the state Senate District number 9, I believe it is.
Yeah.
We were just getting into the conversation. So you're from there. You were born and raised there. Talk a little bit, if you could, about just the demographics of the district and how shocking of a victory this was for Democrats.
Yeah. So I feel liberated to say this because I know y'all are political nerds like me. The last competitive race in this area I can think of was the post Jim Wright special election of like 1990. So
Wow.
this is a place, the county's
Wow.
interesting because it's the bellwether county of Texas, but this part in particular, it just people don't campaign there. It's Republican, it's kind of a non negotiable. So the demographics, I think the best way to explain it, there's four main as I was going through the precincts, there's four main groups of people to pay attention to that I think reflect on a national audience. So there are the suburbs between Fort Worth and Dallas on the north side, and those are very, very Tea Party centric. That is sort of the beating heart of the Tea Party MAGA world of Texas. And the Republicans performed. They won most of those areas, but did not do as well as they usually do. And then you move to the west, and that is the north side of Fort Worth, and that is heavily Hispanic. That's the beating heart of the Hispanic community in Fort Worth, and historically. And then you move to the west side, and that's where I grew up. And that's it's somewhat diverse, but it's pretty much it's known as the wealthy white side of town. And this is where oil millionaires and billionaires live, and the class that supports them. And
Sure.
most of those precincts flipped for Democrats, which totally stunned me. And
Wow.
then you get further out west of Fort Worth, and you get working class areas around the Lockheed plant, which manufactures the F-35. And many of those places flipped to the Democrats. So, and there, it was mentioned on Twitter a zillion times, but I actually had the same kind of reaction when I looked at the precincts. There's a town actually called White Settlement outside of Fort Worth, and White Settlement went Democratic. So
It's a bit on the it's a bit on the nose, that name of that place. Wow. That's quite something. So
Great.
so I to your point, I read this, and I still can't get my head around this. It's something like more than half the people who voted were registered Republicans. So the suggestion is Democrats won all the Democratic vote, they won most of the independent vote, and they must have won a pretty significant chunk of the Republican vote as well. Not a majority, but it's significant enough percentage.
So the Texas political class, I would say the Republican consultant class is brilliant. It's just in order to survive in Texas politics at that level, you've got to be really good. And their analysis across the board of the numbers is that this was not a symptom of Democratic enthusiasm. This was independents and Republicans showing up to vote and voting for the Democratic candidate. So
Wow.
I didn't see that coming, and when that was explained to me, I was pretty astonished.
Is that the
Good.
sign that we've been looking for? Is that event? We've been hearing about blue Texas. I remember Ron Kirk was the savior for the Democrats, and that was over 20 years ago, that he was going to be the guy who could flip it back. But is this the sign? Because it seems like the recipe for Democrats to win statewide in Texas would be getting Republican and independent votes in a decent chunk. So is like this the sign that Texas is actually competitive finally?
I think it's a warning sign, is how I would say it. I don't. So what I want to just I would say, uh, everybody in Texas pays attention to Tarrant County because it is the bellwether. So this is the largest Republican urban county in the country that I'm aware of, unless that
Yeah.
status changed. And it stunned everyone in 2020 when it flipped for Biden, and in 2018 when it flipped for Beto. Now, Tarrant County is not just this district. There are much more Democratic areas in Tarrant County that come to play. This was a Republican district. And so I think Tarrant County has to be paid attention to. Uh, but there are people on the ground who will say this was a very bad candidate on the Republican side. She did a very poor job of consolidating the Republican vote behind her after she defeated another candidate in her party. And so there's a lot of explanations for why this is unique, and don't set your hair on fire, Abby. But just culturally knowing this district, I think this is a real danger sign for Republicans nationally. And it's both because of what I've seen in the white vote, and it's also because of what I've seen in the Hispanic vote of this turnout. And so when we talk about the Hispanic vote, often we concentrate on South Texas or areas that where Hispanics are the majority. That was not the case in this district, but they turned out and were consequential. And so this is a very, very serious warning sign, but it should also be caveated. This is an off year, or not off year, but this is a special election. There was a very big snowstorm. This is rodeo season in Fort Worth. So, take the grain of salt we apply to every special election.
But we
But
should point out, Michael and I didn't say this, the Republican candidate outspent the Democratic candidate by 10 times in this race. This wasn't a case of like they didn't put resources in, and Trump even social media posted about it on Thursday or Friday to try to get the vote out. So it wasn't like Republicans were caught totally asleep here.
Absolutely. They were ringing the alarm. And Republicans have been worried about this race since October, November. I've been in and out of the district seeing my family, and it's been a low grade. Like, this was not like suddenly everyone woke up a week before. Although there was sort of that behavior. But the other thing about that spending that must come into a Republican from Houston was extremely worried by those numbers, because there's just not that much infrastructure, particularly in the areas where this district voted Democratic. So the obvious factor going on here is there's a lot of organic turnout that maybe these people weren't necessarily touched by the party more directly as we are accustomed to in big campaigns.
Yeah.
But I think, to the point you said earlier, the fact that you had so many Republicans who clearly cross party lines to vote for Democrat, now that's got to be worrisome. And I think it has to be worse in the larger context of Texas politics, because you mentioned this was a bad candidate. Well, Republicans might be poised to nominate perhaps the worst statewide candidate they could in Ken Paxton for the Senate race against John Cornyn. I mean, our take on this has been Texas isn't going to be close if Cornyn's the nominee. But if Paxton's the nominee and James Tallarico is his opponent, I mean, are we talking about this race as being a toss-up?
I wouldn't go there, but even before Saturday's election, this race was starting to be taken more seriously by both parties. And it is that lineup where most national strategists see the Democrats' best chance. Now, I'm sure we're heading in this direction. Jasmine Crockett has a completely different theory of the case. And so I think, broadly speaking, and I don't put 2024 in this category, and really even 2022, but Trump has not been that popular in Texas, particularly in the cities, ever since 2016. That's when we saw the um, West Houston, North Dallas with Colin Allred and Lizzie Fletcher, those seats flipped. The West Fort Worth resembles those areas very similarly. So there is a problem for Trump in the cities, particularly in midterm years when he's the president.
Before we get into the Jasmine Crockett, Texas also state that Republicans redistricted over the summer. They gerrymandered further. And I know that Hakeem Jeffries was bragging about how Democrats are going to win most of those seats now. How do you feel like are there seats that are now competitive that you weren't necessarily thinking would be before Saturday?
So they drew it to pick up 5 seats. One of those is a safe Republican seat that I don't see any scenario of Democrats picking up. 2 of those seats are South Texas, and if your name is Henry Cuellar or Vicente Gonzalez, the 2 congressmen down there, you're feeling a lot better. And then you go up, and I should know these numbers by heart now, but I guess it's the Texas 9th District, and there's another one in the Hill Country, or east of the Hill Country. Those could be competitive in a worst case scenario for Republicans. And that's been my operating principle since these maps came out. And that's kind of how both party strategists see this. Where we start getting into the concept of a dummy mander, these seats were drawn to be pretty safe. I think incumbent protection was a big motivating factor in this. But I would also keep an eye on Texas 23, which is West Texas, and I think it's the 19th. No, I think it's the wrong number, but the one in the middle of South Texas. So these are
That's Pudillo or
so the congresswoman there is Monica De La Cruz, and probably the most noteworthy Democrat running for that seat is a Tejano singer named Bobby Polito, and he had a good fundraising
Polito.
quarter.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I noticed that he was pretty, he had a good fundraising quarter. And it's interesting that that can be a segue to the Senate race because he and Tallarico endorsed each other and Crockett endorsed his opponent in that race. They cross endorsed. So it's sort of 2 different theories of the case of Texas politics and what is winnable.
Yeah, I saw that too, and it seems like maybe it's a very low key slate that seems to be forming, at least in that instance. But that's extraordinary in itself. Like I was thinking through Texas politics, I can't remember the last time there was a Democratic statewide primary this competitive, this well funded, and has this much interest. And that's the biggest difference between this and Beto in 2018. He had some nominal challengers, but he pretty much, locked that down pretty early.
Yeah.
But I just want to point out to you the point you said a second ago that when you said when Trump's not on the ballot, that Republicans maybe don't do it as well. 2018, Beto lost by 2.5 points in that race to Cruz, which I think is the closest, maybe not one of the closest statewide races, at least for a Democrat in 90s, I guess it would be.
It's the
When Ann
closest
Richards
Michael one.
won re-election.
And
Yeah.
we should point out that in that race, if the number I saw was correct, in the state Senate district that flipped on Saturday, Beto only got 43%. So you can see where that result could indicate that there's still more ceiling than that 2 to 3 point loss that Beto had.
And this area was when I started seeing Beto signs in yards all over West Fort Worth, that's when I knew this race was real. And so that's how seriously I take this pocket of the country and as a barometer of where things are headed. And to an extent, the Texas Democrats had petered out since Beto ran in 2018. The enthusiasm sort of diminished, and you could also see that. So it's we I might be a little biased, but we couldn't have had a more interesting geography for a special election.
Yeah. No, I mean, your bias seems appropriate in the situation. Uh, I also noticed on Trump's approval in Texas seems to be pretty low for a red state, and I'm curious: is there a good explanation in your mind why Trump is not as popular in Texas as he is in other red states? Is it just the changing demographics of the state, or is something else going on here that's leading to him being a little less popular?
This is just a guess, and I have not seen the latest numbers, but I think it's because so much of this state has cities and suburbs, and these are, I mean, it is rural, and you certainly can see the rural vote come out on election night. But I think that's where, as opposed to a say Wyoming, there's not these, it has 5 or 6 metropolitan areas, and so I think it's the complicated nature of Texas.
I also wonder is that to do with the fact that, Hispanic voters seems to have abandoned the Republican Party, at least in the past year, or abandoned Trump. I wonder if that's playing a role as well.
Um, So I think the most interesting place in the country is South Texas because it did go so red and it's been
Right.
trending that way since 2020. Um, and that is a region that is very sensitive to tariffs. This is, the NAFTA. This is where Interstate 35 comes through. Um, and the other thing is ICE. And I mean, and this is just kind of a point of levity, but I asked a Democratic source in Fort Worth if ICE mattered in this special election. And I was referring to the weather because my parents had basically been snowbound for several days. And
Right.
this person was like, "Are you referring to winter ice or ice ice?" And I was like, "Well, both."
Right.
And but there is some thought that ice in the proper form is not sitting well with people.
Yeah, I mean, you can't look at the numbers among Hispanics, the national numbers, the drop off. I mean, I even make this point that Hispanic voters they're concentrated in a number of states: Florida, Texas, California, Arizona. But I mean, it would seem to me that if you have a major shift in Hispanic support against the president, against the GOP, that the place that might matter the most, besides maybe Florida, is Texas. Well, at least Texas has more, I think, more competitive races this cycle than Florida does.
And was
Are you
getting
frozen?
unstable. Do you have me?
I think.
Yeah, there you
Yep,
are.
we got you.
Sorry about that. Um, So I've talked quite frequently with a Republican consultant named Mike Madrid, and he has emphasized to me that the Hispanic vote is a monolithic group in the sense of the economy, the economy, the economy. But his argument is be careful how we talk about this because um, just because they're not voting for Republicans doesn't mean that they're suddenly becoming or yellow dog Democrats, that this is a very fluid group. And even if they seem to be migrating toward the Democrats this year, it should not be seen as a long term realignment. And I just don't think there was enough evidence in Texas to have drawn conclusions that the Hispanic vote, we just haven't been through enough cycles to say that this was a permanent realignment.
Oh, I
Well,
couldn't agree with you more. I mean, a lot of the arguments about Hispanic realigned Republicans was based really on a sample size of one. Because if you look at the other midterms in 22 and 18, you look at the election in 20 and 16, presidential election, Hispanics were still fairly solidly in the Democratic corner. 24 was really kind of an outlier as far as Hispanic support dipping for Democrats.
and this is a population, if you look historically, has swung back and forth. Republicans have never gotten a majority, but Nixon did better, George W. Bush did better, Reagan did better, and then there were dips in the middle. Abby, so to Michael's point about sort of national stuff, have you heard of districts or states or races in the last couple of days that, in light of this, both parties are saying this is now on the radar, or this is something we should pay a lot of attention to?
I've been pretty knee deep in Texas, but I think just kind of having gone through several cycles of this, what I and I've had this argument, I mean, debate with sources. I could see a scenario where a David Valadao type House Republican who's a really, really good campaigner can hang on just because he's used to it. He has lost before, but like he knows how to do this. But you could get some congressman who's never had to run a general election. His consultant has never had to. They don't have the muscle memory of how to appeal to people outside of a primary. And I could see those members having more trouble in reelection. And that's when the waves get real. And that is a real wave, is when those people start getting in trouble.
I've been saying this to my subscribers for a long time. There's always races. I feel like I remember one in Minnesota in 2006. It might have even been Tim Walz's race that like wasn't there until 2 weeks before. And since I'm a historian, my favorite is David Price in 1994 in North Carolina never appeared on a list of targets for either party, anything. He lost and then he came back and won 2 years later. It was kind of a fluke, but it's those people who nobody expects to be at risk, and all of a sudden, either 2 weeks out or not at all, the alarm sounds, and you have these races that get really competitive.
I just want to say, sorry, Abby, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead, please.
Oh no, I was just going to say one small counter to that. I've asked about the surprises, and I talked to one pollster who said on the Republican side that the super PAC money is so overwhelming that they don't think they're going to have surprises at the end. They'll be able to poll so extensively. That said, that doesn't mean these candidates or these incumbents are prepared for a real general election.
Yeah, that's the
I,
thing. If you haven't run a competitive race 20 years, 30 years, it's a
Ever.
big deal. Yeah, ever.
Yeah, I just want to endorse this point. This is a great point, Abby. I can't endorse it enough. Like if you, I was this joke that a consultant once said to me, the one thing that an incumbent politician is most afraid of is a competitive election, and they go out of their way to avoid a competitive election. And if you don't have one for a long time, you're right. You just aren't prepared to face off against somebody in a tough race, and that can really come back and hurt you. I think of someone like Joe Crowley in New York, which is it's a primary, I realize, but like these things do happen. And I think it's an interesting argument that I hadn't thought about this, but it's a great point that you might see places we hadn't considered where you have a good Democratic candidate who maybe is able to raise some money and a Republican who just really has, as you said, the muscle memory is not there and hasn't had to do this in a while. And, you see a bad result for them on election day.
I'll just throw an example out there. It's not it's too early to call it a surprise, certainly, but Chuck Edwards in Western North Carolina got outraised for the quarter. There were 20 Democrats outraised, I think, Republican incumbents, and some were self-funders where you just sort of roll your eyes at it. But that's a race where the Democratic candidate is good and is raising a lot of money, and there hasn't been a competitive race. In that, well, it's hard because they've redrawn those districts so many times, but that's the kind of incumbent who gets caught sleeping a little bit.
Yeah.
Right.
So the most interesting number in politics right now is these candidates' individual fundraising, and that's for two reasons. One, they candidates get a lower rate in television ads than super PACs, so this is very precious money that goes farther. And the other reason is so it's the biggest warning in politics if an incumbent gets outraised, and that just shows the challenger is really sophisticated, is running a professional campaign, and should scare the daylights out of an incumbent. All that said, the amount of money that appears to be coming at the midterms,
Insane.
particularly on the Republican side,
Same.
I don't know how to process where that money goes, and I've been doing this many years.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the Trump
it's a
super
lot. It's a
PAC
lot.
had $305 million, I think, sitting around.
You have
Um,
the DNC RNC discrepancy, and it's rough.
yeah, there's just huge, huge, huge money on the Republican side. But and that will I guess that flows mostly into some of these Senate races. Some of the totals I've seen tossed around for potential spending in these Senate races is like presidential level spending
Mhm.
from 10 years ago.
Absolutely, and it's but there is a point where this becomes the law of diminishing
Yeah.
returns. There's only so many TV ads you can run, and the TV network, the local affiliate runs out of space. And I mean, that's a very antiquated way to look at campaigns. But I do wonder if there is a diminishing returns point. And Democrats are used to being outspent and work really hard to be efficient with their money. But boy, this is a lot of money coming at them.
It is, and I was about to make the point about diminishing returns, but I think the problem for Republicans, it seems to me, is that they have not figured out a method for really turning out Republican voters when Trump's not on the ticket. And you saw this in 18, you saw it in 22. You're seeing it in special elections. I mean, I think this is a real problem for Republicans. Democrats, I mean, about the enthusiasm gap, there's that clearly on the Democratic side, but that's usually the case in a midterm. What's different a little bit about this, what's happening to Republicans now, is that they just don't seem to be able to. There's a subsection of the electorate, small percentage, but that is only voting for Trump. And you saw this in 24. I mean, I make this point all the time that in 4 of the 5 Senate races in swing states, Democrats won. Harris lost all 5 of those races. She got more votes than Alyssa Slotkin and Jackie Rosen did and still lost because there was this huge gap between the Republican Senate candidate and Trump. And that was when he was on the ballot. When he's not on the ballot, I mean, seems like a really huge problem for them. I don't know if we've fully internalized how big a problem this is going to be because that problem exists and been existing since 2018. But also, you have this. He's so incredibly unpopular, and the combination of those two strikes me as the recipe for a perfect storm or leading to some kind of blue wave with those kind of things going on.
The I've had a Republican source beat the drum with me since the summer that this is why Epstein matters, is that there is a sliver of the MAGA coalition that is very disenchanted, and this was framed before the release, so take that for what it is. But that even a sliver of the MAGA coalition feeling disenchanted with him is a very big problem in the midterms.
Right.
There's another thing that occurs to me that creates a problem when using all that money. Abby was mentioning earlier that a lot of Republicans seemingly went to the polls in this state Senate race and voted for a Democrat. And what parties do with turnout operations is they try to get their people out. But they could very well be turning out Republicans who are going to vote against their candidates with this money. I don't know that they have sophisticated enough tools to know who has soured on them over the last year, and therefore will vote for a Democrat if they show up versus staying home. So that becomes a complicating factor when you have a significant, even if it's 15-20% crossover vote. It doesn't have to be massive to turn out votes for the other guy.
Yeah, I think and it's less political sciency, but it's just sort of the instincts of organic turnout, and that's what a lot of this feels like, and that's just something that you know it when you see it, and I think that's what happened here. One other thing I would just mention about, the Democratic candidate, Taylor Remick, he was a Lockheed, union leader, and I think that was
Yeah.
a powerful spot, but I had a national Democratic source praise him because he didn't have the social media dossier of incendiary comments like in the Tennessee special in the fall, and that is a really ideal candidate. He's a veteran. Veterans tend to not have as many problems in their oppo files, and so this was. I don't think he was an AOC level superstar, but he got the job
Right.
done.
This brings me to, I guess, the other topic that we have sort of danced around a little bit. There was a headline I saw today. I think it was ironically enough in the Washington Post. Texas Democrats taste victory, then turn on each other. And that of course refers
Yeah. Let's
to
talk about that.
the
Yeah.
Senate race and someone who decidedly does not have a light social media profile in terms of saying incendiary things, Jasmine Crockett, and this Senate primary that is now less than a month to election day. How do you see that turning out?
So I think there's 2 pressures on Texas Democrats right now. Redistricting is a vicious process, and if you're the party in the majority inflicting that on the other side, you not only get a better map, but the damage and the aftermath is very divisive. And I think there's a lot of that going on in the delegation.
Yeah.
If Texas Democratic politics, but also there is a nomination that clearly both camps believe is of value and that this is a real race. And so I mean, we just haven't seen this much infighting because there's never been anything of value to fight over. And so it is, we are really in uncharted territory when you start looking at history with a Texas Democratic primary and the Republican one too.
So So I want to talk about that Republican one, but first on the Democratic one, I think. So I'm curious what your sense of handicapping this race. I mean, I think there is a sense that Crockett as a black woman will do better with black voters, but she's also alienated Hispanic voters in the past. I mean, how decisive is the black electorate in Texas, and how much do you think it is in? I should say decisive in a primary, and how much do you think that they are supporting Crockett?
Um, I have not looked at any polling lately, so the latter question I'm gonna maybe punt. But there is no more important vote in Texas. This is the most organized. The black vote turns out. Um, there's just no question. And so the Tallarico mission is to lose less badly in that block. The the question I have about this race, and I've not done the full deep dive in the FEC reports, but Crockett launched in mid-December, and Texas is. I can't even describe how big Texas is. It took me 2 days. I took my time, but to drive across the state one time. El Paso is closer to the Pacific Ocean than it is to Louisiana. There are many TV markets.
That's mind blowing.
Yes.
I did not know that. That's a great stat, by the way.
You learn that when you grow up in Texas.
I guess, yeah, yeah.
And there's many media markets. And the other thing is Beto O'Rourke has raised the bar in retail politicking. Texas Democrats expect their candidates to show up in their towns and like just stop and think there's 254 counties in Texas. Whereas in, the normal Democratic losing campaign just flies around to Dallas, the Valley, and Houston. And so my question is, can she set up an infrastructure? Because Tallarico has been doing this for 6 months and he's been going to county dinners for years. And so is she able to prop up a campaign fast enough to be viable? And this sprint after Christmas until early March, it is just an absolute breakneck pace. And usually some of the things that I see, and to an extent Tallarico too, but Crockett is doing things right now that I'm like, that's stuff that probably should have been done in October, whether it's lining up donors, super PACs, or things like that. No, I'm not saying she's doing it because there's some legal things, but her camp.
Yeah, and it seemed like she did not raise a whole heck of a lot of money in the fourth quarter. She transferred a bunch from her house account, but Tellerico, I think it was 3 times as much money he raised for the quarter.
So I was not that surprised by her numbers because the launch came in the last 3 weeks of the quarter. So she was not able to fundraise as an actual Senate candidate. And also within those 3 weeks, it's Christmas. And that is the absolute worst time to ask for money. And
Right.
people kind of check out. And she's obviously social media, but I think people kind of check out.
Should we also touch on the Republican race, Michael?
Yeah,
The
let's
Republican
talk about. I
primary?
mean,
Because
that's the one
that
I'm so curious about. I've never seen Paxton. Every poll I've seen recently has Paxton in the lead, but there are three candidates, and there's going to be a runoff if nobody wins 50%. Correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So it would be probably going to be a Cornyn Paxton showdown at some point. I think it's in May or April. I can't remember when the runoff
well,
will be.
is it definite that Cornyn is able to beat Wesley Hunt for that
Well,
second
there's a good
I think
question.
spot?
so.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think so. Um, Hunt is one of many politicians I've seen from Texas who come from a big city like Houston or Dallas, which are huge cities, but they forget there's also several other huge cities in Texas. And so I've seen mayors and members of Congress think that that they're well known everywhere. And it's like, no one in Dallas really knew who you were before then. And then you've got to spend money to advertise. And so I think Hunt is consequential in that his candidacy is going to force the runoff, but I would be very shocked if he made the runoff. The rule of thumb, there have been exceptions to it, but Henry Cuellar is a recent example. But any incumbent in Texas who gets kicked to a runoff is in very deep trouble. Even if they win like 45 to 35% or something like
Really?
that means more than half the electorate voted against you of the primary. And then you start getting into Republican politics. And most folks think Ted Cruz won in 2012 over David Dewhurst because of the electorate that shows up in a primary, which is very, very conservative. Now,
Right.
Fort Worth seems to have been a shocker, and it is very apparent Cornyn is, or his people are making the case to Trump. Um, Bad candidate in Fort Worth. Ken Paxton has flaws. He could lose the seat in the general election. I'm sure Ken Paxton's people would disagree with that, but this has given, I think, Cornyn a shot at a Hail Mary for the endorsement, and it's not an impossible Hail Mary from what I've observed.
Is the endorsement enough to get Cohen over the top, do you think?
A lot of
Endorsement from
people
Trump, I
believe
should
that.
say.
A lot of people
Yeah.
believe that.
Yeah, because I
I mean,
guess Paxton
yeah.
hasn't raised a lot of money. That's the one thing where he doesn't seem to think he needs to. So an endorsement maybe matters more because he can't really spend a lot of money on the air to hammer Cornyn.
An endorsement of Paxton.
No, I'm talking about like if why the Trump endorsement might be enough. Like, Cornyn is the establishment. He's been around for a long time, but Paxton really isn't running like a huge ad campaign against him. To sort of remind people of that, right?
I have not seen the ad numbers lately, but I would assume very soon there will be a ton of ads in both directions, and that's just the clip of the escalation in advertising. So I think most folks, I think Paxton's very viable. Cornyn's in a lot of trouble, but I have underestimated John Cornyn in the past, and he somehow pulls things out. So I think this is as unstable of a Senate race. I put Michigan in this category too, but these are factors that are completely out of the candidates' controls, the campaigns, and the national parties, and it is wild.
It is. And it's interesting too. I mean, look, you have to think Paxton is much more the MAGA candidate, right? Paxton has endorsed and gone along with so many of Trump's conspiracy theories over the years. I have to imagine that he's more sympathetic toward Paxton, but at the same time he doesn't want to lose the Senate seat. So I have to. Um, I would assume he would endorse Cornyn. I mean, just because he doesn't want to lose the race. But I would imagine going against Paxton would be a tough move for this president.
I think there's some internal politics, but I would be surprised if he endorsed Paxton.
Yeah, that would be
And I
shocking.
think I think it's just being posed. You want to save the Senate, and it's not even save the Senate. This is hundreds of millions of dollars of spending that Republicans will have to do to put this fire out, and that is money that will not be used in other Senate races. And so
Right.
that's the driving force of the Texas Senate race.
Paxton made this point on Twitter today, saying that Cornyn was wasting like $50 million of money that could go to Maine and North Carolina and other places because he's already cooked, and they're pouring all this money in. The one thing I wonder with Trump is he is desperate not to be associated with losers, and unless he's 100% certain that he pulls Cornyn across the finish line, I wonder if he hesitates and says, I don't want to back him unless I know for sure he's going to win.
I think that's a smart point. We'll have to see, but it's needs to happen sooner rather than later for John Cornyn because early voting is not that far away.
Yeah. I mean, I would assume it's going to be either he'll endorse Cornyn or he won't endorse anybody. I would assume but I think you're right. I'd be pretty surprised if he endorsed Paxton. If he endorses Paxton, I think we'd agree the race is over.
I would think so.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let me ask you something. Is Paxton, do you think that Paxton is wounded enough that a Democrat, legitimate chance? You said it wouldn't be a toss up, but like, would you say that a Tallarico Paxton matchup, Tallarico's got a 40% chance, 45% chance, somewhere in there?
I don't know about probabilities, but what I'll say is, in Paxton's defense, he has run statewide several times since he's had a lot of ethical allegations, and he has survived both primaries and general elections. So that's very important to keep in mind. The general I think that this is a very coveted Senate seat, but I think right now the battle is over whether Republicans will have to spend in the race to protect Paxton if he's the
That's
nominee
it.
or Cornyn. And so that is the battleground. That is how, there's sort of this attitude in Democratic politics where people roll their eyes and say, not Texas again, which I think always Texas is a good thing. But the but people who actually work in politics and makes decisions and have to be very cold-blooded, Texas has been great for Democrats, even as they've lost since 2018 because it's forced Republicans to spend money there. And so
It's a
if
great
they
point.
achieve that objective on the national map, that is a success. And so
Yeah.
that's where my frame is now. I don't know what the climate's going to look like in September, October, but I think it's like that's when I'm going to start kind of running probabilities. But but this is objective one is for Republicans to avoid spending and Democrats to force them to spend.
One thing that I think is going to be interesting, though, for Paxton, this is the first race since his impeachment. And I can just imagine the Democratic ads saying, Ken Paxton is so corrupt that Republicans impeached him.
It's true. It
And
is
I,
true.
I
It's a
don't know if
true,
it
it's a
will
true
work,
point.
but it is an interesting, we're in uncharted territory. There aren't too many people who are impeached by their own parties who aren't then tossed out of office.
I mean, generally, he's got a Teflon shield, but he's never faced Senate races are different ball games. I mean, those are national. There's national involvement, national expertise coming in, and national money. And so, it is going to be interesting if he's the nominee.
Can we? I want. I mean, now, Abby, you cover Congress. That's what you do. That's your day job. Besides, I mean, loving Texas is one thing, but your job is to cover Congress. So I'm curious. Look, it was an interesting thing after the results on last week, where Ron DeSantis basically came out and said, look, guys, we're in trouble. Republicans are in trouble, and this is going to be a tough midterm. Uh, from your perspective, talking to Republicans on the Hill, I mean, how would you sort of rate on a scale of 1 to 10 the level of panic among Republican members of Congress about what's coming in November?
I had them texting me on a Saturday night about a race in my hometown that had nothing to do with federal issues. So I think that says everything. And it was a lot of like, what's going on here? Tell me about this district. Like what is it? I mean, I have to do a plug. Fort Worth is one of the largest cities in America, and nobody knows anything about it because it's Dallas's little brother. But like everyone suddenly got very curious about my hometown, and so I mean, a Saturday night in everybody in Texas politics was in texting chains.
Interesting. By the way, I think Fort Worth, along with San Jose, are the redheaded stepchildren of American urban America.
There you
Nobody.
go.
San Jose is the 12th biggest city, maybe ninth. It's the top 10, I think, biggest cities in America, and no one knows anything about it at all. It's like just a little bit offshoot of San Francisco. So, what are they doing about it? I mean, I guess if they are panicked or they're getting panicked, I mean, what is there any sense among the leadership that they need to do something to deal with this situation?
So most of me, I mean, I've mostly been on the phone with Texans, and the uh, consultant class and people on the ballot, Republicans, are like, how do we campaign to moderates? How do we campaign to independents? And that's a muscle memory a lot of them have forgotten in recent years. A lot
Right.
of consultants have made a lot of money on primary campaigns that have never had to run a general. And so that was the immediate of the consultant class reaction on Sunday was like, how do we change, and what kind of nominees do they nominate up and down the ballot? Not just the Senate race, but elsewhere, because now there's a sense you can't just assume a seat is going to be Republican because it was last term. And so, uh, I think the one thing folks agree on the Republican side of this is that Republicans no longer have the luxury of really crummy candidates running even in Republican districts. That's where we are in the wave.
Well, that's interesting.
One
That
thing
is a
that's going to be
shift.
interesting, Michael, since you mentioned DeSantis, is Florida is theoretically still going to try to remap in the spring. And it will be very interesting to see how aggressive they do or don't get, given that they have also a very heavy Hispanic population.
Um, if I can pause for just one moment, I wasn't planning on using my phone and I need to plug it in, so I'll be right back. Sorry, guys.
Yeah, we
That's
run into
take
this
your time.
every week.
This happens to us every single week. Every single
Yeah,
week. So this is a really interesting conversation. And you mentioned Florida. I think one thing that I've been thinking a little bit about. By the way, there's a weird. Do you hear a weird
I'm
sort of
hearing that
sound?
too. Yeah. There's some
Are
weird.
listeners hearing that also? I'm getting a weird kind of like staticky sound on the
Yeah,
microphone. I'm not sure what's
yeah.
driving that.
But yeah,
So I
Abby, we
apologize
go
for that,
down
guys.
to like 1% battery every week, and then we have to
Yeah,
call it quits because we're
that's
out
when we
of
have to call it
battery.
quits. But
Okay,
you
sorry.
mentioned about Florida. I mean, this thing, Alex Vindman has jumped in the race. He's, I really just don't think he's been able to make that race competitive. But he's going to raise a lot of money. And I have to wonder if that does put more pressure on Republicans to have to spend money in a place where they were thinking they were going to have to spend money.
That's exactly what Chuck Schumer's doing right now with recruitment. I think his net has been very wide. Alaska coming online. I think Alaska is actually one of the more flippable ones. But at this point, recruitment for Democrats is creating races that will drain Republican money. And I'll
Right.
come back with the Hispanic vote in Florida. Mike Madrid, the Republican strategist, said that what Fort Worth showed us was Mexican Americans are voting just like Hispanics in other parts of the country. And he specifically said South Florida. And I believe he was referencing the Miami mayor's race where the Democrat won. And so if I'm not a super Florida source person, but I do kind of there was a little bit of anxiety about redistricting and spreading themselves too thin, but they felt confident that it was going to work. And so, I can't help but think they're looking at this and going, "Oh wow."
Yeah, I mean, I have to think this is going to make them think twice about wanting to do because right now, I mean, I guess that one of the takeaways from what happened in the race last week is that now Texas Republicans there's some concern that they may have actually gerrymandered themselves into losing House seats, losing some of the seats they assumed they were going to win. So I have to think that has to weigh heavily in Florida.
And Mike Madrid had it described perfectly because I don't think a dummy mander is imminent in Texas, but he said it's knocking on the door of one. And so
Right.
I don't think any of these maps would, or I don't think any of these districts would backfire now, but we'll see what the spending looks like in October. And if the other thing is these incumbents, sorry, as they get in trouble in their election chances, if you're a safe Democrat or Republican candidate, you're supposed to fundraise, to help the campaign committees spend in other districts where there's competitive races. If you're suddenly afraid of your own race and losing your own race, suddenly you're not sending money to the committee.
Right.
And
Right.
so waves as they expand kind of compound themselves. And so it's, I don't think we're there yet, but boy, these are very, very treacherous signs for Republicans.
Now we've been hearing for a couple of months now that there was going to be House Republicans were going to step down or were going to resign. There would be retirements. We haven't seen them. Uh, are they still possibly coming?
So I've been surprised we haven't seen more. We expected a ton right after the holidays, and it was more of a trickle. Um, I have a spreadsheet with all the filing deadlines, which is your last chance to run for office to keep an eye on. One, that's often when retirements surface, an incumbent at the last minute decides not to file. Uh, or if a Republican is going to start rebelling against Donald Trump, they might start after their filing deadline if they don't have a Trump endorsed opponent against them. I still think that's kind of specious because you still have to deal with the President Trump in another election cycle. But that's so I've been surprised we haven't seen more, but I think we still have several months of filing deadlines. But this would be very late in the season for retirements to drop.
It does feel like at this point it's pretty late for people to drop out. I mean, the one thing I'm so curious about is Susan Collins, because I guess she hasn't formally announced she's running. It's hard for me to believe she would be dropping out of the race, but I guess anything. I mean, I guess Olympia Snowe dropped out in February or March when she dropped out, so I guess it's possible it could happen.
Apparently,
And
George
I
Mitchell
mean,
did the
she's in
same
a
thing in
very,
Maine.
oh really? And she's got such a difficult race. I don't know. I mean, I guess it wouldn't stun me if she decided not to run.
I mean, she is the appropriations chair, and it's really unusual to see an approps chair retire. But I've had the same thought and have discussed with my colleagues the Olympia Snowe issue. Olympia Snowe retired kind of out of nowhere, and I think it was in March of the 2012 cycle, and it blew Republicans' game plan for the Senate apart. And I do think that's a fact to keep in the back of our minds. But and I mean, there's these reports of Trump calling Susan Collins and yelling at her, and I hope I'm
Yes,
quoting them
yes.
correctly. And like that's not a fun place to be. So, but Olympia Snowe had no um, guilt about putting her party in such a jam so close to the election.
And
Yeah.
notably, yesterday, Collins was in the Oval Office with a red hat in her hand, and everybody was saying about how that was made for a Democratic ad. And I started wondering, I always think back to Eric Paulson in St. Paul in 2018, who Trump apparently endorsed because he knew it would hurt him, and Paulson didn't want it.
That's
It
interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, there was some evidence in Texas in 2018 that Trump made a trip to Houston and it was counterproductive. So, but then, in 2024, he was super helpful to Republicans in Texas. So it's anyone's guess cycle to cycle.
So, one last question about Democrats. There's been all this talk. You were just talking about it before you jumped on about Democrats need to moderate their image and move more to the center. I mean, my sense of it is, if you're a Democrat, you're basically running on the fact that you're not Donald Trump and you're not a Republican. I mean, when you talk to Democrats, do they see that? I mean, do they see this as the best path to victory, as running against the president?
I think it's affordability. It's all anyone wants to talk about. And so
Interesting.
that is, what color is the sky? Well, it's blue, but let me tell you about the price of eggs. And so I think it is all about affordability.
Okay, but obviously tying it to attacking Trump, right? Attacking him for there not being affordability.
I'll be curious to see. I have not had these conversations. Sometimes attacking Trump too much reminds like the people who like Trump to turn out to vote.
That's a
So
great point.
Right.
I don't really know, but I do think there are some really strong candidates on the Democratic side who run really strong ad campaigns, and I think it's going to be really interesting to see what kind of ads we see. I would expect
Interesting. Yeah, I agree. I agree.
fewer cookie cutter ads.
Right. Are there any races, like primaries particularly, that we are not paying attention to, that we should be paying attention to, that you think can be competitive on either Democratic or the Republican side? Yeah, that
I'm
sound is
endlessly
really, what
obsessed.
is that sound?
I have no idea.
Sorry. I,
I don't know if it's me.
it is a
Sorry.
very strange, I can't figure out what it is. It's very odd. It's
We'll
like a
work on this. We
crackle or
apologize.
something.
Oh, it might be my technical
Yeah,
issues.
yeah.
I'm endlessly fascinated with the generational change in the Democratic Party. And there are a number of interesting primaries of young Democrats challenging older incumbents. And typically, one or two incumbents a cycle in both parties will lose reelection in a primary. We could have three go down on election night in Texas alone. And
Hmm.
there's a primary in the San Fernando Valley in West LA with Brad Sherman. That
Guy Sherman,
is
right.
the most interesting part. David Scott in Georgia. And a lot of Democrats have decided to pass the torch on and are retiring. And I think it's because of this threat. But several others are, we could see 10 Democratic incumbents lose reelection. That may be going too far, but I talked to a chief not that long ago, and that person projected 6 to 7 Dems lose in primaries.
Wow.
Wow. That is surprising. But you think that's not from an ideological standpoint, but more generational.
It is absolute. I think this is 100% goes back to Joe Biden. And there was
Yeah.
not the permission structure to challenge the seniority system. And, there are consultants and staffers who are rooting for or have rooted for members of Congress to retire. And some of them should not still be in Congress. Like, it's just not a job for um, an 82-year-old who's got mobility issues. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the interesting races that I'd like to see some polling on is the Massachusetts Senate primary, where Seth Moulton is challenging Markey. Now, Markey's been down this road before. He got challenged by Kennedy 6 years ago. But I do wonder if this is the kind of race where people say, well, either way, you're getting Democratic votes. You might as well go for the guy who's younger.
My sense is Markey's probably going to be fine. It's still very early, but I also think Joe
Interesting.
Kennedy picked the wrong race. I think he'd be much more viable this.
Yeah. He got
Yeah,
impatient.
you're right. Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, Moulton's getting impatient too, but I don't blame him. And Massachusetts, look, he could wait until Warren retires, I suppose, but that's, I mean, it's a ways away, and she can easily run for reelection. And she's up in 5 years, I think she's up. It's
Yeah,
tough in
she was
Massachusetts. There are
12,
not that many
18,
places to go.
24. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
true. It looks like we lost Abby technically. But it's interesting it hasn't trickled out to the Republican Party at all. I just saw that John Carter, Texas, 85, running again. Um, and we,
I'll
we see
invite
this
Abby back to see. I'm not sure what happened to her there. Maybe we can
Hal
get her back on.
Rogers. I think she froze. But Hal Rogers
Okay.
in Kentucky. You have Republicans all over the place. Older Republicans, Virginia Fox, who seem to be on the path to run again. Again, as Abby said, a lot of these people are waiting for the filing deadlines because they either want to anoint a chosen successor or they want to not be a lame duck. But there's a lot of older Republicans, and it doesn't seem to have translated to their side. Maybe because Biden was a Democrat, but the age issue is not really a party issue necessarily,
No, it's not.
or
It's not.
inherently. Well,
But
well,
I think
Abby
what
is.
is yeah, we'll see if Abby gets back on, and if we hopefully we get her back on, but if not, I want to just thank her.
Oh, it says
She
her phone was
what
overheated. It says
uh,
she said in an email. See, this is the problem with the Substack thing. We may have to move to YouTube at some point where we
we may
can
have to.
use our tech subs. But we thank Abby. It was great to have her. There was a lot of really interesting things. But I have to point out to Michael the ironic story of the day happened when we were on with Abby. The Washington Wizards made a massive trade hours after the Washington Post eliminated their sports section.
Anthony
Which
Davis, what would they
yeah,
give up for him?
I don't know, but I just you can only shake your head at that. And the other big story happened during that is the Supreme Court turned down the challenge to the Texas or to the California congressional map. So the Democratic gerrymander is in there.
Not a huge
What
surprise, I think. Actually,
no,
not a huge
no. Sam
surprise.
Alito and Neil Gorsuch basically telegraphed that one, in their
Yes,
Texas opinion. But one thing I point out is we talked a little bit with Abby, but mentioned 20 Republican incumbents got outraised. Several of those incumbents, were in
incumbents.
Virginia. Incumbents. I don't know why that came out wrong. But several of the incumbents were in Virginia. And so Virginia Democrats are fighting among themselves about what the new map ought to look like.
Right.
Um, and it was blocked by a lower court, and we don't know where the appellate courts in Virginia are going to go. But it raises the possibility that I've been thinking Democrats probably pick up 2 seats in Virginia if they didn't remap, 3 to 4 if they do. But it raises the possibility they could even pick up 3 races, because I think the
Oh,
John McGuire. Oh, there you are.
Sorry about that,
Um,
guys.
no, no
that's quite all
worries, no
right.
worries.
I was just talking about the Virginia map, and that of those incumbents who got outraised, I think 3 of them were in Virginia for Republicans, and some of that may be that the Democrats are fundraising based on what they think is going to be a new map, but that maybe even if that map doesn't happen, Tom Perriello outraised John McGuire by 3 times in Central
Wow.
Virginia. And that's a big disparity in a district that flipped in a wave in either '06 or '08. That's anchored by Charlottesville down there. So it's a Republican district, but it's not an impossible district.
Yeah, I think and the other thing is about fundraising is it seems to me, I don't know if this is mathematically it feels true. Democrats tend to escalate their fundraising as the cycle goes on, and Republicans tend to do stronger early in the cycle. That they get their low hanging fruit through PACs and donors, and then Democrats, as excitement builds in the small dollar world, they tend. It's very unsurprising in this era for Democrats to outraise their opponents in October of the on year.
Yeah. By the way, I just want to pick up something you said a second ago about the primary challenges. What's interesting about you say it's generational. I think what's interesting is that people, I think about a year ago, were suggesting maybe there was going to be some sort of quasi Tea Party movement in the Democratic Party, against sort of incumbent Democrats. And you're not seeing a lot of these sort of ideological challenges that you saw with the original Tea Party back in 2010 or 2012 or 14. That really has materialized. I mean, the only place I can think of where maybe you'll see an example of it is the Maine Senate race,
I
although
was
that
gonna say,
feels generational as well.
yeah, that there's the age thing there.
I think
I
It's some
New York is facing New York Dems have a Tea Party issue.
Yeah, that's a good point.
There's a
That
lot
that
of open seat races in the congressional delegation, and we'll see how that map shakes out. But Dan Goldman is I think, in quite a bit of trouble.
Yeah, I get the sense Goldman. Yeah, that's my district where I live in New York, and I think he is in trouble. And I mean, look, I have my personal feelings about what Brad Lander's doing, but from a political standpoint, I mean, he took advantage of the fact that he lied himself in Mamdani, and Mamdani won, and now he's got that endorsement working for him against Goldman. And I wonder, however, if the what's her name, the Republican from Staten Island, Nicole.
Maliatokas.
Maliatokas. Yeah.
Thank you. If her district is redrawn, does Goldman perhaps run there? I think that's one interesting question.
A Levi Strauss heir running in Staten Island is a race I want to cover.
I mean, right. But there is a good part of brown, sort of yuppie or liberal Brooklyn that would be in that district. But yeah, you're right. And my question is, with someone like Max Rose, who won that district previously, would he run again? But I think you're right that Goldman could be in a little bit of trouble. I haven't seen any recent polling on this, but my sense is it's not going well for him.
The other race that looks like there's sort of an ideological thing is kind of the Texas Senate primary, but even that is less about ideological differences and more about rhetorical differences and Crockett being
Information.
Yes.
a bomb thrower. Um, more so than
Mm,
I can't point to an issue where they disagree on the substance.
right. And I
There are not a lot of policy issues in this race. So far as I can say that this is very, very personality driven, which I think is a very big problem for Democrats because there are online followings of these two Texas candidates, and feelings are getting hurt. And the eventual winner's job is to bring the supporters of the opponent behind them. And sometimes that happens, sometimes it doesn't. The primary is very early and there's a lot of time to heal, but I think it's when it's all about personality, it's a lot harder to get back together.
Right, right. But I mean, I don't get the impression. I feel like Tallarico's attacked Colin Allred more than he's attacked Crockett, at least on personal terms. I mean, has there been a lot of sort of sniping between the two candidates, or is it mostly coming from their followers?
I think it's mostly follower driven. But I think the bigger question is, and I'm not fully up to speed on all the super PAC activity, but what do the super PACs do, and how negative does it go with their surrogates on television? And I think that's to be determined, but it's coming very soon.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. As far as Congress, anything exciting happening in Congress is just sort of the usual Republicans having a hard time getting anything done because they have such a thin majority.
I would say we're at a point where most of the energy and interest is starting to shift away from the Hill. Republicans have gotten their big priority, the BBB, through. And just at this point in the cycle, reporters, members, everyone starts looking at the campaigns, and that starts to become the consuming issue. But, Trump could do something next week. And, I mean, the fact that the impeachment of Kristi Noem is a daily discussion is a real thing. And so you never know what he's going to do next and how Congress will react.
Well, let me ask one
But
last question because I know you have
yeah,
to run. Um, as I see it, and Michael and I haven't talked about this yet, as I see it, we are headed towards a long-term shutdown of DHS at the end of next week. How do you see that
mm,
playing out, given the posturing that we've seen the last couple days?
Um, I'm not super in the weeds on the policy end of this, but boy, this is a bad brand that is in American politics right now. I don't think most people knew what ICE was a year ago, and it is something many, many Americans are um, familiar with. And I also think Democrats are getting braver about fighting against it now. I think I don't even know if brave is the right word. It's more resolved after the two killings. There's just I would not suggest Democrats are looking at this in a very calculated, poll tested way. I think there's a lot of really angry Democrats who, um,
yeah.
moderate in temperament, who are sick and tired of voting for funding bills that will support ICE, given what's happened in the last month.
That's really interesting. I mean, I think we think everything in just terms of politics and in terms of narrowly, like what's good for me and my reelection, what's good for the party. And I think you're right that the anger is palpable. I mean, you feel this from just watching, I mean, you spend more time with these folks than we do, but just seeing them on television, seeing the clips of them. I mean, I see someone like Ruben Gallego, who just seems to have just completely has no more fucks to give anymore when as far as to just attacking members of this administration. And I that is something that feels different from what I think we've seen from before from Democrats.
And I think you're seeing it rhetorically, but I also think there's much more subtle pushback, in whether and how votes are cast and procedural things, and there is much more friction to the system coming from the Democrats.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I get that impression too. Yeah.
Well, I
Well,
do.
listen, Abby, go ahead.
Thank
Sorry,
you.
go ahead.
Oh no, I
I
just need
think
a haircut and I got an appointment, so I better go. But
we
All
were
right.
about to
Thank
say
you very much. We appreciate
you
it.
gave us an hour of your time. We're so thankful. Subscribe to Puck. Read Abby every day. She's fantastic. Puck is fantastic. Thank you so much for being with us. This
Yeah.
was fascinating. I learned a ton.
Yeah.
Thank you so
this
much,
was a
Abby.
joy. Thank you, and I'm sorry for the sound issues. But
No,
y'all
don't
finish
worry.
Don't
your
worry
No
hockey and
about
have
it.
a
worries.
great afternoon.
You too.
Thanks. Take
All
care.
righty. Yep. Bye.
just to build on this DHS conversation, Tom Tillis this morning said that banning masks was a non-starter for him, and he's one of the more reasonable Republicans. So unless Trump is going to absolutely like force Republicans to do this, I'm beginning to think that we're headed towards a situation in which Democrats have no incentive to fund DHS unless and until there's a crisis with another that involves another element of DHS, where it's the Coast Guard, whether it's TSA, whether it's FEMA, where they start to feel uncomfortable having that close down, whatever it is. And Republicans don't seem to want to actually give, even though they're upside down on ice polling wise.
Yeah, I haven't thought about this in great detail, but I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense to me. That I think for Democrats, look, the thing is, this is kind of a winning issue for Democrats right now. I mean, there just is not a lot of support for ICE out there, and the numbers have shifted pretty dramatically against ICE, against Trump's immigration uh, uh, agenda, policy, what have you. And uh, look, to me, this is not a bad place for Democrats to be. I mean, we this is a debate that's been going on for a while now. You have people who've been arguing, oh, Democrats should focus on the economy, not immigration. And, that's generally, I understand where that argument comes from. But if you can, this is a sort of an old Karl Rove insight. If you can undermine your opponent's biggest
Yep.
advantage,
Yeah.
that gives you a huge advantage. And there's no argument about this that Trump. So here's the thing on immigration, the people who like his policy immigration are going to they're the sort of pure MAGA. They're going to vote for him no matter what. But I think that uh, this is an issue that does actually piss off some elements of the electorate, some Republicans, but certainly Hispanic voters. And we made this point last week about college-educated whites and the gap between college-educated and non-college educated whites. Non-college educated whites are basically not the entire, but they are the base of the Republican Party. But they are not enough to win, right? In 2020, they weren't enough to win. Trump also needed to make inroads among Hispanics and among young people and some black voters, and those things really helped him to win. And again, it was still a pretty narrow victory. But if you're losing those places where you gained ground in 24, and you're losing those occasional Trump voters who aren't going to turn out, as we've seen repeatedly in midterms, special elections, boy, you're in a lot of trouble. And I part of me looks at the map right now, and it reminds me a little bit of like 1994 or 2010, years that were disastrous, or 2006. The first two, 94 and 2010, were of course disastrously bad years for Democrats. They lost the House in 94 for the first time in 40 years. They lost something like
60 seats both times,
yeah, I mean, I think it
huge.
was 70 in one of them. I mean, they got destroyed. And then in 2006, of course, when Democrats won back the House, which was a backlash to Bush, Katrina, the Iraq War, so forth. It kind of feels like that now. I have to say, I mean, this Texas, I've been thinking this for a little while, and the Texas thing really kind of crystallized it for me that the backlash against Trump is real and it is profound. But more than anything else, it is coming from places that really can hurt the Republican Party. I made this point earlier about Hispanic voters are very important, but they're very localized as a segment of the electorate, right? They're mainly in California, Arizona, Texas, and Florida. But a big swing in Hispanic voters in a place like Texas or a place like even Arizona or Florida could cost you a host of seats. But even a smaller segment of Hispanics in places like Pennsylvania or North Carolina could really hurt you too. But again, but I'm saying, like, if you can't rely on those voters who you really helped you get there in 24, who are the voters that you're relying on? And and especially when we know the enthusiasm among Democrats is going to be so high. Or you're already seeing this in the special elections, the level of, and you saw this in New Jersey and Virginia elections. There is a lot of energy on the Democratic side. So why do Republicans stop that? And I don't have a good
And,
answer for it.
and they're also caught here because, okay, say Trump decides to get conciliatory, reads a poll and says, I want to cut a deal on ICE. I'm going to force the Republicans to come along. I want to keep DHS open because it does important things. Like it's not an inconceivable scenario, but that's going to piss off elements of that MAGA base that do care about this stuff. They're going to say, oh, he's sold out, he's gone soft. And even if he loses, 5% of them, that matters in a midterm where the
Yes.
turnout is lower. So he's kind of trapped. And my only slight disagreement with Michael on where it feels like the environment is going is it's a little bit early for me to feel like we know for sure in a high velocity world. But it's getting late early for Republicans. It's
It's get
get
I couldn't agree with that statement more. It's getting late early. And also keep in mind that generally speaking, the way the polls look in January, February is often how the election ends up going. There's not a lot of movement during the year. Now, what's going to happen in these races is you're going to see comes down to individual campaigns. And, look, I am of the view that campaign effects, the impact of campaigns on elections is it's important, but it's sort of marginal. It's not a huge. You're not going to shift 5, 10 points just by the way your campaign runs. Maybe if your opponent's terrible. Generally speaking, it's much more to do with like the national environment and presidential approval and so forth. But campaigns do matter, especially in close races. So these things are important. And I think that Ab made a great point that you might have races of candidates who just haven't are out of practice and
yeah,
haven't run,
that's
facing off against perhaps well funded and you know Democrats who are good at politics, and you see races that shouldn't be close that will be close. But I wanted to say the thing also. We talked about 60, 70 seat shifts in '04, in '94, and 6 and 10. I don't think. Oh, thank you, Gay. I do not think that's a nice thing to say. I don't think that is what you're going to see this time because the level with the level of redistricting that we have
no.
and gerrymandering, but even a 25 or 30, that is more realistic. But
But
that could be on the same like level as 2004 or I'm sorry, 46 or 94, just not as many seats.
Well, 2018, they won 40 seats and I think they got to 230. This time, 15 seats would get them to 230. I was sort of thinking that that might be headed towards the ceiling, that 230, 235, right in there would have been the ceiling. Now I think you can maybe make a case that it pushes up more towards 240, which would be a pretty big majority by our standards right now and would be 20, 25 seats would be a massive wave in our redistricted, geographically polarized world. The other thing to keep in mind here is I really do think the Senate is coming into play. It's
Yeah,
still
I
not a
agree.
50-50 thing, but I think that Democrats are in much better shape than they were 6 months ago. And I think that there's a real chance here. The only thing that even gives me a slight amount of pause is that their Iowa fundraising was terrible for the candidates in Iowa. And that is one of the six races that is potentially competitive. Um, but Sherrod Brown eviscerated John Husted in fundraising. Um, and
Yeah, he did.
I think people are underselling the potential of Ohio flipping because, again, in a Democratic wave in 2018, Sherrod Brown won, and it was against a weaker candidate. But Houston hasn't. His fundraising was not good for an incumbent senator. He's an appointed senator. So I'm starting to feel more like Democrats are probably going to win 3 seats unless they screw up and nominate Graham Plattner. And even then, he may yet win because it's a wave, and waves can
Yeah,
carry bad candidates across the finish line.
yeah,
But Texas, Alaska, Iowa, watch those races. It's not inconceivable that some other race somewhere becomes competitive, whether that's Florida. And I tend to agree with Michael that Alexander Vindman is going to raise eye-popping amounts of money and not win. Um,
yeah, I agree.
but it's not impossible to paint a scenario where Florida becomes competitive. It's not impossible that Sharice Davids gets into the Senate race in Kansas, in which case it becomes competitive. Um, Dan Osborne in Nebraska. So the Senate is coming more into play, and I'm starting to pay attention to some of those governor's races and state races and things. There's a big article today that Josh Shapiro really wants to win a trifecta in Pennsylvania, which Democrats have not had since before 1994. They lost it in 1994. And he wants to do things policy wise to give himself a platform basically for his 28 presidential race. But there's a lot of these races. We saw the Georgia election stuff the other day where Georgia governor is really important, and is a winnable race. Iowa governor, Rob Sand has raised more than all of the Republicans combined last quarter. So there are a lot of these races that are looking better and better for Democrats, and Republicans have a real problem. And they have a president who tends not to be able to get out of his own way,
Yeah,
which just makes
that's a
things
big
worse.
problem for them too. Yeah, I mean, that's the other thing too is that Trump is just going to keep making mistakes. By the way, I did get the note I was jokingly referring to earlier said that I'm irrelevant now. I assume this person is referring to the other Michael Cohen because
How can people not
want
get this?
people want to torture. I look nothing like I don't know, I look nothing. We both have Semitic good looks. You might say, but I just for the record, I am not the transformer fixer. If you're here because you think I am,
But
make a penance by subscribing to Truth and Consequences and
by
the
the
book
way,
according to Brian.
yeah, you should definitely subscribe. Um, I did a video Saturday night for my subscribers on the Fort Worth race, but a sign of how unpopular things are, Senator Roger Wicker has gone public with his opposition to the DHS's proposed plan to turn a warehouse in Byhalia, Mississippi into an ICE detention center. Now he claims this is all about economics and what would benefit the community, but that's a sign that Republicans are not just falling in line because they know this is really bad for them. They know ICE is really bad and really unpopular. And as Michael says, this is just sort of the cherry on top of the sundae, so to speak, of bad economy and prices going up and Trump's tariffs hurting people and things and the Midwest, the Farm Belt paying. So it really is and Larry, the nationalizing the election thing, first of all, showed what a blithering idiot Donald Trump is. He doesn't actually understand how our system works or how elections work or any of that. Um, and for those who are concerned about that, it would be very difficult to try to pull off, because it's highly illegal and unconstitutional. And it seems like it's something that it would be not happening, or unlikely to
Yeah,
happen. But
I know people are worried about this, about him trying to interfere in the elections. I have to say, I just don't worry about this all that much. I never have. It's very, very hard for, the president to interfere in elections. And when Trump has tried to do it, he has failed. And look, let's be honest, he's failed in large part because Republicans haven't gone along with it. I mean, I think one of the things people forget about 2020 is that after the election, he went to state legislators in Michigan, state legislators in Florida, in Pennsylvania, tried to get them to,
you mean Georgia, not Florida.
and of course, Georgia. Well, yeah, Florida's a different thing. But yeah, Georgia's a better example. Um, to try to find votes for him and switch the election in his favor, and of course they all rejected it. And no one really helped him outside of his like coterie of fellow sort of crazies. People like who's that lawyer, the guy who got indicted? Forgetting his name now.
You're talking about John Eastman,
Yeah, Eastman. Yeah. So
the
I
Claremont
don't
guy, former
right. This
Clarence Thomas Supreme Court clerk, by the way, not just
right.
some random crackpot that Trump found in the Yellow Pages. I know I'm dating myself with that reference, but
Yeah.
uh,
No, I look, yeah, but still, I mean, it's important to point out that a lot of people weren't going to go along with it. I know this question someone brought it up. You're going to have ICE at polling stations in Hispanic
I
areas. They might. I mean, I
so
frankly,
if
I
I
don't
could
think
comment
that's a
on
real
that.
issue. But I'll yeah, go ahead. You go ahead.
I was gonna bring that up. I think that's the most realistic thing that Trump could do, but it scares me less than it did 30 years ago because we have so much early voting and mail voting
Exactly.
that
Exactly.
it's not just like, oh, ICE goes around on election day, scares people off, and you lose. It would take a much more concerted, long-term effort, and even then, that you have different polling places for early voting and things. I've never thought I would say that I was thankful for our decentralized electoral system. But in this case, it really is mitigating against the chicanery that Trump would like to unleash. And we certainly have to remain vigilant, but realistically speaking, and the other thing is, the states that are the battleground in a lot of ways are controlled by Democrats by and large. Pennsylvania, Michigan, North Carolina Republicans stole control of the state electoral board by giving it to the state auditor instead of the governor, because that's like their only statewide office that they hold.
Right.
But even there, the
Right.
governor and the attorney general are Democrats and could fight
Right.
back. Michigan,
Secretary of State also.
right, right, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Nevada. Well, there's a Republican governor in Nevada, but everybody else is Democrats down the line. So I do think that it's again, your machines are not connected to the internet and by and large. So like even the tech groupies are going to have trouble figuring out how to
Yeah,
cheat.
I, I just find these arguments uncompelling, and I think people get themselves into a tizzy and hysteria because Trump makes these kind of comments. But you simply haven't seen this happen in any election. Um, and again, one thing I will say about Republicans, as much as I will criticize them for their support for Trump, I mean, except for Kerry Lake, I think in Arizona, they have. Uh, Republicans accept when they lose elections. They don't do what Trump does and why that they was stolen from them. Kerry Lake being an obvious exception. So I know it's not something. Look, the Georgia thing is embarrassing and it's awful, but it's also I think a case of the only thing I'm referring to is going and trying to get information on the 2020 election. This is just Tulsi Gabbard trying to stay in good stead with Trump
That's exactly right.
by making it
And
like making him think he actually
actually,
won in Georgia.
this is Michael's hitting on a bigger point that I think is important. Donald Trump says a lot of things. He rarely follows through on them.
Yes.
And it mostly reveals his ignorance about how government works and what is
Right.
possible and what isn't. The dangerous thing, the thing that I think is much scarier about Trump 2 than Trump 1 is he now has a bunch of people, toadies, people
Yeah.
like Pam
Yeah.
Bondi and Tulsi Gabbard, who are determined to come up with a way to try to please him to curry his favor. And I do think
Right.
that that makes it more dangerous than it was the first time around. That being said, again, federal judges have by and large stood up to Trump. State officials have stood up to Trump. We have a very decentralized system. It is incredibly hard to try to rig an election. Honestly, I'm more worried about a presidential where Congress has to certify the electoral vote than I am about a midterm election where, realistically speaking, the House turns over. Um, and there's not really a way to prevent Democratic governors, for example, from certifying results. There's not, local officials control elections. So unless and until you see evidence that they're able to do um something, I mean, look, I think Musk might try to cheat. I'm not saying that these people wouldn't do it if
Well,
they could.
what is Elon Musk going to do? I mean, honestly,
Like exactly. Like what
what's he going to do?
where's the capacity? About the only place, to be very honest, that I really, really worried the most is probably Texas, and that's because the Republicans are so thoroughly awful and control everything.
Yeah.
And that's the only like competitive race where I look at it and say, okay, yeah, Greg Abbott, I wouldn't put it past him to try
Yeah.
something. And obviously Ken Paxton as Attorney General is the ultimate ultimate I don't even know what you say, like the fox guarding the hen house kind of thing.
Yeah.
Um,
Exactly.
but
Right. I mean,
outside of that, like,
to,
okay,
to
they're gonna try something in a red state where Democrats really don't have much of a chance anywhere.
to this point about putting ice in Hispanic neighborhoods. First of all, I don't. I would be surprised if that happens. It happens, but first of all, I think you would have uh, judges would pretty quickly rule that to be illegal, as they have in a
And
variety
by
of
pretty
situations.
quickly, Michael means like 10 minutes quickly
Yeah,
if
I
we're
mean,
talking about election day.
it's so obviously illegal that I don't think that would be something that judges would go along with. I also, I make the point again. I mean, what does that mean to put people who make this argument that they're going to put ICE, guys at the ballots? Like, people don't vote on election. I mean, people do vote on election day, but people vote by mail. People vote early, right? I mean, they're going to put ICE guys there for 3 weeks. I mean, it's not a. I mean, Texas has early voting for I think a month, right? It just isn't something that is a serious concern. And the last thing I'll say is, I think if that were to happen, I think it probably would help Democrats. I think it would motivate Democrats even more at the backlash, and I think it would piss off Republicans too. I don't. Those are the kind of things. Look, the backlash to Trump is driven in part because of what he is doing on mass deportation, what he is doing with ICE. You know, if he wants to empower ICE and do the same things that have led him to being at 39% approval rating, go ahead. I mean, it's not going to help him. I don't really
Let's
think.
see
And
how
and
low
I
you can go, Donald. Let's see, can you get
right.
down to the
Uh,
20s?
Right. I mean, I
Um,
think that's kind of how I look at it. Now, I mean, look, I could be wrong, and I've been wrong before, and maybe this will be more of an issue come November, but I'm skeptical. I really am. It's not. Let me put it this way: it's not something I'm overly concerned about. There are lots of things that concern me, but ICE showing up at polling stations to stop Hispanics from voting is not really one of them. To be honest, if I'm being
and
completely honest with you.
I agree with that, and I think that, as Michael said, you say you put ICE agents at polling stations in Texas for a month because that Senate race gets close, and that's one place where state officials wouldn't protest. There's a lot of races that could get competitive. As we saw here, a 31-point swing in a state Senate district, even if you have a 16-point swing instead of a 10 or 11, which has been the average in special elections, if you go up to 16, that now flips the Iowa Senate race, that flips the Ohio Senate race, that flips the Alaska Senate race. I think Florida is 16 points. You're talking about
Yeah,
bringing a lot of races into play, the more backlash that
but
there
I,
is.
I just want to make one point too that is really important to point out, which is that the shift in special elections from uh, 24 to the president is like 13 points, but the shift from 2020 to president is like 9 points on average. 9 points shift in the Democrats' favor off of from the 2020 election. I remind you, the 2020 election, Biden won by like what 5 points and 4.5 points, I think it was, and Democrats won a trifecta, governing trifecta. I mean, although they did lose House seats, so that's worth pointing out. But still, the point I think is that it leads me to more and more to the conclusion that we are in a this is not a blue wave. This is a tsunami. That this is really going to be so bad for Republicans, and we could see a huge, huge shift. Again, I this is not unprecedented, right? You
No,
saw this happen in 1994. You saw it happen in 2006. You saw it happen in 2010. Um, 18, you kind of saw it happen on the House side, not as much on the Senate side. Although Democrats, it was a terrible map.
the
Democrats, they did
map,
pick
it
up
was just an
seats.
awful map.
Awful map, and I think actually they lost a seat,
They
but it
lost
was such
seats.
a bad map.
They lost two
It was
seats,
such
but
a bad map. Yeah,
yeah, the map was awful. I mean, we see this most midterms, 1982, 1986. Um, it's rare that you don't see this. And just to put a number on this, since we beat up on him last week, Harry Enton just did a segment this morning showing that Harris won New York by 13, and House polling has Democrats up 27. In
I
California,
mean,
she won by 20. House polling has Democrats up 28. And you might say, well, who cares about New York and California? But there's competitive House seats
by the way, you know
in those
why? Here's
places.
why that is, though. This is important to point out. Also, do you know why the gap is so huge between now and 2024? Because Democrats in those states stayed home. I can't
Yeah,
make this point enough that people don't appreciate how much 2024 was an anomaly election. There was the shift in the national vote was 6 points. It was 4.5 for Biden, and Trump won by a point and a half in 2024. In the swing states, it was closer to like 2 or 3 points, so much different shift. But the most of the decline in Democratic support came in blue states, and I did the numbers this a while ago. Like places like um, New York and California, I think a million fewer people voted for Harris than voted for Biden in 2024. So you saw a huge drop off there, and that's why you're seeing a 20-point difference between polling now and then, because those numbers just were not commensurate with the level of Democratic support. I will go back to this point again. That we will look back on the 2024 election and we will see this election as an anomaly in modern American politics. An anomaly because, and people are going to laugh when I say this, but I will say anyway, we are living in a period of relatively sustained Democratic, not dominance, but overperformance. You saw it in 18, you saw it in 20, you saw it in 22. Um, you know, you saw it on some levels in 24, not on the presidential. I was just tweeting something out the day about this, that one of my favorite things about 2024 examples of like what I'm talking about is in North Carolina, a state that Harris lost by 3 points and Democrats lost the one swing state they lost in all last three elections, 16, 20, and 24. Democrats won 6 out of 8 statewide elections in North Carolina. Governor, lieutenant governor, secretary of state,
Supreme Court.
attorney general, Supreme Court, and public education. And if you again, I made the point earlier in the podcast. If you look at the live, Democrats do better in these swing states than Republicans generally do, and I think 24 is really an outlier. And I think it's an outlier because there was this major anti-incumbent wave that was tied to the post-COVID inflation. You had something I got wrong about 24, that you had these um, occasional Trump voters who turned out in big numbers, and that's the reason why he won a lot of the swing states and why Republican Senate candidates lost those same races in those same states. So I think 24 is the anomaly here. And again, I said earlier, Democrats have won popular vote in 7 of the last 9 presidential elections. That happened after Civil War for the Republicans. It happened in around the 1890s to Roosevelt. It happened from Roosevelt to the mid 60s. It's unusual for a party to dominate that much in presidential elections the way Democrats have. And I suspect that going back to an equilibrium, which Democrats continue to be, not the, I don't want to say dominant, but the slightly preferred party by most
Yeah, because I
Americans.
was gonna say, I think most people hate both parties at this point.
But if you were to ask a question about like some of the obvious rejoinders, well, why don't Democrats then? Why do they literally shut out of all 3 branches of government? And my argument would be because the structure of our political system is weighted toward Republicans, right? Rural, small majority white or large white population states, rural states, have outsized power in our political system. I read something the other day that Republicans have not had. Okay, states Republican senators have been a minority uh, since 1996. So Democrats, even now, where majority of Americans live in states where Democrats are senators. Even Democrats have, 6 fewer seats than Republicans do. So, we have this system that is basically helps Republicans and hurts Democrats. And look, we talked about this here, but until Democrats decide they want to change that structure, create new states, expand the size of the House, they're going to keep playing defense. And I'll make one last point before you go. One last point that if Democrats won every single Senate state in swing state, every single Senate race in swing states, if they were 14 out of 14 instead of 10 out of 14, they'd have a 51 to 49 majority in the Senate. If you win every swing state, you would think you'd have a larger majority, but Democrats would have a 2-seat majority.
And I know we have to wrap up soon because I've hit that 6% battery moment.
Yeah, I'm at 7%. Yeah,
we're in sync here. But this comes back to the conversation we were talking about earlier. One reason that there's all this discussion of do Democrats need to moderate, not Republicans, is Democrats have these inherent disadvantages in the political system. When people are talking about Democrats needing to moderate, they're thinking about the fact that they have to win a Sunbelt state in 2032 to win the presidency. They're thinking about the fact that they need to get competitive in places like Utah and Kansas and Texas, where they haven't been competitive in a very long time, to have any sort of significant Senate majority. It's not so much that they're saying, oh, they have to moderate because they're risk of becoming like a small minority. It's more about like, how do you expand the playing field because the structure is skewed against them. And I think sometimes we lose sight of that even in so much as there's this call for Democrats to moderate, it's about that. It's about expanding the playing field, and that's because the system is skewed against them. In a lot of ways.
But they're not going to win the Democrats aren't going to win by consistently winning in red states. They have to create new blue states. Last thing I'll say, I am baffled by this Anthony Davis trade. I want to just make a quick moment on that. The Wizards, who suck, had the worst record in all of basketball, who already traded for Trae Young, who's making, I think that for a extension after the season. They just traded for Anthony Davis, who makes like $50-60 million a year, and also needs an extension. So they're basically going all in with like Davis and Trae Young and their collection of youngsters, which I find to be a really odd strategy. I don't get it.
I have watched more of the NBA this week than I have in like 20 years, mostly because the Sixers are on the West Coast and I like to work out late at night. And I need something to occupy me with hockey gone for the next 3 weeks. I know Sixers fans are mad about a trade we made today, but
Terry McCain, yeah.
that they trade him for draft picks. A lot of the anger stems from the fact that our basketball team owner owns the Washington Commanders, and so they keep saying, well, that we're saving money for the Commanders, basically, because
That's
they
interesting.
worry about the luxury tax. But yeah, I don't know too much about this except to say that it is pretty embarrassing for the Washington Post that they don't have a story up because
Yes.
they got rid of their sports section
Yeah.
because Jeff Bezos has no vision or willingness to invest in his company,
Yes. Yes.
despite being worth what $240 billion. That to me is the big takeaway on that story.
Um, I want to just add, oh my God, the Lakers center Jackson Hay was suspended one game for pushing a Wizards mascot. My God. Actually, this Larry mentioned the Celtics. They did trade Anthony Simons for Nikola Vucevic. I like that trade for them. That was a good trade. But um, the Pistons have the second best record in all of basketball. They have the best record in the East. I watched them beat the Nuggets last night, game that they dominated in the first half. Pistons, man, they're going to the finals. I'm telling you right now.
All right, we have you on the record. Um, I will. I can't really brag about any of my winter sports teams because they stink in
No, the Sixers are playing
perpetuity.
well right now. The
They
Sixers look
are.
good right now.
They do look good. And maybe, hopefully, something good happens for them because as the Phillies podcast I listened to said last night, this is the cranky season for Philadelphia sports fans.
Yeah,
This
yeah,
gap when the
yeah,
Eagles are not in the
absolutely.
Super Bowl, till pitchers and catchers report in a couple of weeks.
That's
So,
right. That's right. And actually, I'll mention the Celtics, Larry. I have a feeling Jason Tatum is not coming back this year. So there is that. So if he doesn't come back, they are not going to be, they've overperformed, but I don't think they're going to be able to, I think we're a better team than them. I'll put it that way. Although if Tatum comes back, it does confuse things. I mean, I don't know if the Pistons are going to make a move. They did trade for Kevin Herter last night. It's a small move. We'll see what happens. I agree. Celtics team, you had zero expectations. Are they the third best record in the Eastern Conference? Or maybe second right now, which is really impressive. But also speaks to how crappy the Eastern Conference has been this year. All right,
all right.
guys. 3 hours, 2 hours and 8 minutes. That's good. We got Joe. Thanks to Abby Livingston. Boy, she was so great. That was fascinating. We have a guest next week. Remind me.
No,
Do
no
we have a
guests
guest
lined
next
up
week?
yet.
No. I will have. We'll talk offline, but I have somebody in mind for next week.
Okay.
Thank you for joining us. Please, if you haven't subscribed to the World According to Brian, do that now. Please also subscribe to Truth and Consequences. And always a pleasure. Now, last week we had trouble. This for some reason didn't get sent out automatically. I just sent it myself. So hopefully that will be fixed for this week. We'll see. But until next week, and just
Take care.
before I say the we'll be on. We'll be on next week, but then the week after, I am on vacation, so we will not be on. So just next week.
And
So we
I
will
have some
see.
scheduled things in March and April, so you stay tuned for when we will be on. It may change week to week, or we may move times, but we will be with you every week at some point. Other than that week that Michael's on vacation.
Other than that week, I'm on vacation. Exactly. But we will see you next Wednesday, and until then,
Take
hang
care.
in there, guys. Later. Bye-bye.
Bye.